Well, it's week 16 and one wide receiver boom or bust can decide your season. Let's cut through the noise and talk about who you're actually starting this week. What's up, Headliner Nation? My name is Brad, the Rankings King. And before we dive into this week's rankings, just a reminder that these are the consensus rankings from the Headliners team. And for more detailed analysis, make sure to check out the start-sit videos from Kyle already posted this week. And if you want even more breakdowns each week, join the Fantasy Headliners community by hitting that join button below. That's going to get you access to extra rankings like flex, kicker, defense, and a spot inside of our Discord. Now, before we jump into this week's rankings, we've got a few hits and misses from week 15, and we start with our hits and Michael Wilson. And no one really knew what to do with Michael Wilson against Houston. With no Marv, though, we put him at wide receiver 21, and he finished at wide receiver 20. At number 2, we've got Wan'Dale Robinson, and Wan'Dale still continues to be our best offseason call. I mean, he's drafted at wide receiver 70, and he's currently wide receiver 17. I mean, come on, right? Last week, we had him at wide receiver 23, and he finished at wide receiver 19. And then what about Terry McLaurin? And listen, that late touchdown saved him and finished wide receiver 15, just above where we had him inside of the rankings. All right, so that's it for our hits, but then what about our misses? And we start with Jalen Waddle, and who knew that MIA would stand for missing in action and not Miami? And week 15, this dude did absolutely nothing. And then what about Cortland Sutton and Mr. Boomer Bust? He boomed in a week, and we had him way too low. And then our next miss was Stephon Diggs. And apparently Diggs only cared about sticking it to Buffalo earlier in the year. When the game really counted, he really didn't do anything. All right, so let's leave last week behind and let's turn the page to week 16. In tier 1, we've got Jackson Smith-Njigba, Puka Nacua, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jamar Chase, Nico Collins, Mike Evans, AJ Brown, and CeeDee Lamb. At number 1, we have Jackson Smith-Njigba, and it's terrifying to have a player that's playing Thursday night football at the top of the ranks. Those games are just always terrible, but he's the number 1 overall wide receiver, and the Rams allow almost 30 points a game to wide receivers, and they were just torched by Detroit last week, so he tops the list once again. At number 2, we've got Puka Nacua, and again, it's terrifying to have a Thursday night player at number 1. Imagine how terrifying it is to have one at number 2 as well. But with the injury to Adams, Puka could see upwards of 15 targets against a difficult Seattle defense. At number 3, we have Amon-Ra St. Brown, and it feels like the Lions can get the ball to St. Brown whenever they want. He's on pace for a career high in touchdowns, and now he gets a Steelers defense that allows just over 27 fantasy points per game to wide receivers. At number 4, we have Jamar Chase, and Higgins is coming off of his second concussion in a month, and Joe Burrow just doesn't look like he's having fun playing football anymore. But Chase has 48 targets over the last 4 games, and they play another dumpster fire team this week in Miami. At number 5, we have Nico Collins, and Nico has a chance to set career highs in every major category. He's the wide receiver 7 on this season and now gets a Raiders defense that allows the 7th most points to wide receivers. At number 6, we have Mike Evans, and if Mike Evans was limited in his first game back and still saw 12 targets, I'm really pumped to see what happens this week. Carolina is easier to run on than throw on, but Evans has historically torched the Panthers in the past. At number 7, we have AJ Brown, and Vegas didn't put up much of a fight in week 15, and Philly didn't have to throw much because of it. Luckily, AJ found the end zone to salvage his fantasy day, but now he gets Washington, who allows the 9th most fantasy points to wide receivers. And at number 8, we have CeeDee Lamb, and it kind of feels like Lamb has been underwhelming as of late, but he hasn't really been. He's basically missed 4 games, and he's still the wide receiver 18 overall, averaging the 10th most fantasy points among wide receivers. Unfortunately, now he gets the number 1 passing defense in the NFL. All right, that's it for tier 1. Now, before we head into the next tier, I want to make sure that you're all set up on Underdog. And you already know that we've been crushing those player pick'ems on Underdog this year. So what are you waiting for? Head over to Underdog Fantasy or download the app and create a new account using the referral code Headliners when you do so. Then just make your initial deposit and come join a contest. And if you sign up with that promo code, again, it's Headliners, you'll get access to all of the promos that Underdog offers weekly. And check this out. Once you play your first $5 are going to give you $75 in bonus funds. So you play 5, you get 75. It's that easy. And don't forget, Jake is also going to be breaking down the best picks weekly in a show on Fridays, and links to join are in the description, and we look forward to playing with you this week. All right, let's turn the page to tier 2. We've got Jameson Williams, Chris Olave, DK Metcalf, Michael Wilson, Rashee Rice, George Pickens, Devontae Smith, Terry McLaurin, Juwan Jennings, and Cortland Sutton. At number 9, we have Jameson Williams, and Jameson continues to be one of the hottest wide receivers in the NFL. He's now had 100 yards in 3 straight games and has a touchdown in 5 of his last 7. Now he'll get a matchup against Pittsburgh, who allows the 11th most fantasy points to wide receivers. At number 10, we have Chris Olave, and it might not feel like it, but did you know that Olave has just 10 points fewer than Nico Collins on the season? He's had touchdowns in 3 of his last 5, and now he gets an average pass defense in the New York Jets. At number 11, we have DK Metcalf, and there's no doubt that Arthur Smith just chews on Crayolas at this point. The usage of DK is all over the place. He went from a season high in targets to a season low in targets in back-to-back weeks. At least we know they'll have to throw against the Lions. At number 12, we have Michael Wilson, and truly the only thing that matters with Michael Wilson is the availability of Marvin Harrison. If Marv sits, Wilson is a top 15 play weekly. If Marv plays, the Cardinals seem to forget about Wilson, and he's more of a top 30 option. At number 13, we have Rashee Rice, and Rice has gone from 2 of the most difficult matchups a wide receiver can have against the likes of the Chargers and the Texans, and now he has to finish the year without Patrick Mahomes. The matchup against the Titans is great, but can Gardner Minshew get him the ball? At number 14, we have George Pickens, and it's not great timing for another tough matchup for George Pickens. He struggled the last 2 weeks against Minnesota and Detroit, and will now take on the number 1 passing defense in the NFL in the LA Chargers. At number 15, we have Devontae Smith, and poor Devontae Smith, he's out there looking like the third wheel on a date. With A.J. Brown and Goddard taking all the volume and touchdowns, we've seen Smith held to 50 yards or less in 4 of his last 5, but we got a great matchup against Washington this week, though. At 16, we have Terry McLaurin, and obviously Terry hasn't played very many games this season, but he does have a touchdown in 3 of his last 4, and now he faces off against Philly, who he scored a touchdown against in 2 straight matchups. At number 17, we have Juwan Jennings, and he may not be getting a ton of yards, but the dude is a magnet for the end zone. He has 6 touchdowns over his last 6 games, and this week he gets a banged-up Indianapolis secondary. He's also 105 yards away from a $650,000 bonus, so that's nice. At number 18, we have Cortland Sutton, and deciding whether or not you should start Sutton is like playing weekly whack-a-mole. He can have a top 10 week. He could finish outside the top 40. Who knows? You just never know, right? But what we do know is that the Jags are much easier to throw on than they are to run on. All right, baby, let's leave tier 2 behind and turn the page to tier 3. We've got Ted McMillan, Zay Flowers, Ladd McConkey, Jacoby Myers, Jalen Waddle, Justin Jefferson, Emeka Egbuka, Wan'Dale Robinson, Jaden Reed, and Brian Thomas Jr. At number 19, we have Ted McMillan, and similar to Juwan Jennings, Ted isn't racking in a ton of yards, but he does have 4 touchdowns over the last 4 games. And Carolina now faces Tampa Bay at home in a must-win game. At number 20, we have Zay Flowers, and back-to-back solid games for Zay Flowers, who's had at least 14 points in 2 straight. It won't be an easy matchup this week against New England, though, who's coming off of a heartbreaking loss. At number 21, we have Ladd McConkey, and Ladd has less than 100 total yards in his last 4 games combined. There's no better matchup than Dallas for opposing wide receivers, but the LA passing game is just not in a good place right now. At number 22, we've got Jacoby Myers, and the big question here is, who does Patrick Surtain spend most of his time on? It seems like BTJ will draw the most coverage, and given the fact that Myers has had at least 9 fantasy points in every game as a Jag, he'll be their highest ranked wide receiver this week. At number 23, we have Jalen Waddle, and with Tua being benched and rookie quarterback Quinn Ewers getting his first start, there's a lot of questions surrounding Waddle. We should see plenty of targets, but who knows if they'll actually be catchable. Plus, it's much easier to run on Cincinnati than it is to throw on them. At 24, we have Justin Jefferson, and Minnesota scored 34 points, and McCarthy threw for 250 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Jefferson still only had 22 yards. He led the team with 8 targets, but only brought in 2 of them. What's going on? The matchup against New York is great, but trusting J.J. McCarthy, That's really difficult. At number 25, we have Emeka Egbuka, and Egbuka remains the clear number 2 wide receiver in Tampa, even with all their receivers healthy. He's also had multiple chances at touchdowns in Week 15 that were just missed. Now they go to Carolina in a must-win game for both teams, and he should once again see at least 7 targets. At 26, we have Wan'Dale Robinson, and Robinson has been a blessing for a ton of fantasy teams this season. He's been PPR gold, and now he'll get one of the most difficult matchups he's had all year against Minnesota, who allows the second fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. At number 27, we have Jayden Reed, and with both Watson and Reed dealing with injuries, we could see an expanded role in Week 16 for Jayden Reed. Luckily, it's a great matchup as well against the division opponent in Chicago, who allows over 30 points to wide receivers. At number 28, we have Brian Thomas Jr., and it's only fitting that BTJ waited until the end of the season to be fantasy viable. But can he do it in a tougher matchup against Denver? There's a good chance that he sees a healthy dose of Patrick Surtain, and that is never a good thing. All right, that's it for Tier 3. Let's turn the page to Tier 4. We've got Troy Franklin, DJ Moore, Deebo Samuel, Khalil Shakir, Romeo Doubs, Michael Pittman Jr., Stephon Diggs, and Jordan Addison. At number 29, we have Troy Franklin, and Franklin once again found the end zone last week for the first time since the beginning of November. He'll get another shot at a good game this week at home against Jacksonville, who's much easier to throw on than they are to run on. At number 30, we have DJ Moore, and with Roma Dunze and Luther Burden dealing with injuries, Moore could get an opportunity at more volume this week against Green Bay. He's coming off of a 2-duh game last week, but also held to -4 yards against Green Bay 2 weeks ago, so this is no gimme. At number 31, we have Deebo Samuel, and Terry's return to the lineup has taken away the touchdowns from Deebo. Washington has nothing to play for, but you know that they'd like to hand the Eagles a loss late in the season. If that's going to happen, they're going to need something from Deebo Samuel. At number 32, we have Khalil Shakir, and Shakir hasn't been anywhere near consistent the second half of the season, but he's only 1 touchdown away from a $150,000 Christmas bonus, and the Browns allow the 6th most touchdowns to wide receivers. At number 33, we have Romeo Doubs, and with the injuries to Wicks and Watson, we could see Doubs turn into a safety blanket this week against Chicago. If he can get anywhere in the neighborhood of 6 to 8 targets in a good matchup like this, he'll at least be a flex-worthy play. At number 34, we have Michael Pittman Jr., and after 1 week of Phillip Rivers, we can see that he's going to spread the ball around and not go very deep down the field. That's enough to see that the ceiling of Pittman will be limited the remainder of the season. At number 35, we have Stephon Diggs, and Diggs was a huge disappointment against Buffalo last week. He's now had less than 5 targets and 30 yards in 3 straight. New England will now travel to Baltimore and face a Ravens defense that's much improved the second half of the season. At number 36, we have Jordan Addison, and if it wasn't for the matchup against the Giants, Addison wouldn't be in the top 36. He hasn't had more than 66 yards in a game since week 3, and we know that McCarthy spreads it around, but it's a tasty matchup here. The Giants do allow the 3rd most fantasy points to wide receivers. All right, so there's your top 36 in tiers 1, 2, 3, and 4, and pay attention because we got a couple of injury updates and some outside looking in. We're monitoring Marvin Harrison. He's currently questionable to play. If he's activated, he'll move to wide receiver 12. Michael Wilson will move down to wide receiver 21. We've got Drake London, currently questionable to play, but if he's activated, he'll move to wide receiver 9. T. Higgins, currently questionable, but if he's activated, he'll move to wide receiver 13. Luther Burden, currently questionable to play, but if he's active, he'll move to wide receiver 29, and DJ Moore will move to wide receiver 34. And then a few other guys on the outside looking in. We've got Jalen Coker, Chris Godwin, Keenan Allen, and Jaden Higgins. All right, so there's your week 16 wide receivers, and one more win and you are playing for the title. Drop your toughest start in the comments. Make sure to like the video, subscribe, and let's punch our ticket to the championship week.
Analytics off the chain, all the channels not the same. Jake and Kyle, you know the name. Headline Nation, we running the game.